He adopted poor, quiet twins mocked by everyone at school. But when they opened their mouths in class, the entire room froze. The day was gray, cold, and unusually silent for a city like Detroit. The orphanage building on the east side stood like a forgotten relic, its bricks chipped, windows fogged with years of untold stories. Inside, in a dim room with creaking floorboards and a flickering overhead light, two small children sat side by side on a torn vinyl couch, Elora and Josiah, 7-year-old twins, frail, underweight, and carrying a silence far older than their years. They didn't speak much, not to the staff, not to the other children, and often not even to each other. But their bond was unbreakable. When one shivered, the other held them. When one cried, the other watched the door. They had learned very early that the world did not offer second chances. Elora had a small scar beneath her left eye from a fall that no one remembered. Josiah still clutched a faded sock puppet named Franklin, the only remnant from their first foster home. They had been passed over again and again. Too quiet, too strange, too emotionally delayed, some said. Teachers had once labeled them slow, developmentally behind, and nonverbal. But no one had asked why. No one looked deeper. That morning, the director of the orphanage, Mrs. Garvey, had told them plainly, "A man is coming to visit. Don't get your hopes up." The twins didn't respond. They never did. And then he arrived. Tall, broad-shouldered, unshaven, and wearing an old army green coat with a patch that had long lost its lettering. His name was Talmadge Kane. No wife, no family, a mechanic who lived in the hills outside the city, still grieving the recent death of his wife from cancer. He looked tired, but there was something in his eyes. Not pity, not hesitation, just a quiet steadiness. He knelt in front of the twins, not speaking for a long moment. Then, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper airplane. Josiah blinked. Talmadge said, "I made this when I was 7. It still flies." He gently handed it to the boy. Josiah took it with shaking hands and opened it. On the inside, written in pencil, were 3 words. "Want to start over?" Elora looked at the man with wide eyes. It was the first time anyone had offered them not just a home, but a beginning. Talmadge stood up and turned to Mrs. Garvey. "I'll take them." "You haven't even looked at their file," she said, stunned. "I don't need paper to know a child," he replied. As they walked out of the orphanage, Elora reached up and took his hand without a word. Josiah clutched the paper plane, and for the first time in their lives, the wind outside didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like it was pushing them forward. Talmadge Kane's home stood at the edge of a pine-covered hillside, just outside the rusting outskirts of Detroit. It wasn't large, nor new, nor anything a child might dream about. Just a weather-beaten 2-bedroom cabin with a tin roof that sang in the rain and creaked at night. But it was clean, warm, real, and most importantly, it had never belonged to anyone who hurt them. The twins sat in the back seat of Talmadge's old Ford truck for nearly an hour in silence, watching the city fall away brick by broken brick. Neither of them asked where they were going. They had been moved so many times, it no longer mattered. Until the truck stopped in front of the cabin and Talmadge said quietly, "This is home now." Josiah didn't get out immediately. He held the paper airplane in his lap like it might vanish if he let it go. Elora looked up at the sky, pale and cloudless, before finally slipping from the truck and stepping onto the gravel. The air smelled like pine and distant engine oil. Somewhere beyond the trees, a hawk cried out. Inside, the house was sparse, but thoughtfully arranged. There was an old brown couch covered with a woven blanket, bookshelves lined with dusty titles, manuals on mechanics, science encyclopedias, a few old novels. The kitchen had a crooked toaster and a dented fridge that hummed like a tired dog. But there was food. The cabinets were stocked. A pot of soup simmered on the stove, filling the house with the scent of carrots and thyme. Talmadge showed them their room, 2 small beds with matching navy comforters, a dresser, and a cracked window that looked out onto the woods. There were no toys, no bright posters, no decorations. But there was something the twins had never had. Quiet. That night, they didn't speak during dinner. Talmadge didn't push. He just ladled soup into their bowls, placed bread on their plates, and sat with them in silence. He didn't try to win them over. He didn't ask them about their feelings or their past. He just existed with them, like a rock in a river, immovable and present. Later, he took an old paperback from the shelf, A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, and read aloud from the introduction. His voice was low and rough, like gravel and smoke. To understand the universe, we must first understand time. Elora blinked. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Josiah stared at the ceiling. Talmadge read until they fell asleep. Both in their beds, still fully clothed, Elora curled into a tight ball. Josiah still holding Franklin the sock puppet. Talmadge didn't tuck them in. He just pulled the blankets gently up to their shoulders and turned off the light. The next morning, Elora found a note on the kitchen table. There are no rules yet. We'll make them together. TK. And next to the note, a small screwdriver set. Josiah picked it up, confused. He fixes things, Elora whispered. Josiah glanced at her. Maybe we can too. Outside, the chickens clucked in their coop. The sun broke through the trees, and for the first time in their young lives, the day ahead wasn't something to survive. It was something they could shape. The school bus arrived at exactly 7:12 a.m., groaning to a halt in a cloud of exhaust. It was old and rust-stained, just like everything else in the town of North Grimley. But to Elora and Josiah, it felt like a spaceship heading into the unknown. They stood on the edge of the gravel road outside Talmadge's home, both clutching their backpacks with rigid arms. The bags were secondhand, clean but faded, with little embroidered initials that didn't match their names. Inside were a few pencils, a worn composition notebook, and packed lunches wrapped in wax paper. Talmadge knelt beside them before the doors swung open. He looked each child in the eye with the same seriousness he'd give to fixing an engine block. You don't owe anyone a smile, he said, but you do owe yourselves the chance to be seen. If they can't see you now, make sure they will later. Josiah didn't answer, but his knuckles whitened on the strap of his backpack. Elora gave a short nod and walked up the steps first, not looking back. The school was a low, flat building surrounded by cracked pavement and a tired fence. The inside smelled like bleach and peanut butter. Teachers hustled through the hallways with clipboards, and students shoved and laughed without noticing the two small newcomers. The principal, a woman named Mrs. Cardle, greeted them at the front with a plastic smile. Welcome to Winter Lake Elementary, she said, barely glancing at their clothes. We'll do our best to make you feel at home. She escorted them to their separate classrooms without ceremony. Elora went to room 2B, Josiah to 2C. As they parted in the hallway, their eyes met, brief but loaded with fear. It was the first time they'd been separated since infancy. Elora walked into her classroom and immediately felt the shift. Whispers, stares. Her shirt had a stitched patch over the elbow. Her shoes were too big. When she sat down, a blonde girl behind her snickered and whispered to the boy next to her, "She smells like firewood." The teacher, Mr. Thane, looked over his glasses and tried to offer a warm welcome. "We have a new student today, Elora Kane. Let's be kind." But kindness doesn't grow on command. At recess, Elora sat alone. Every time she tried to approach someone, they scattered or rolled their eyes. A boy even threw a pebble at her back and said, "Don't talk to us, we're not charity cases." Meanwhile, Josiah's first day was worse. He struggled to speak when his teacher called his name during attendance. He stuttered, barely getting the syllables out. The class laughed. The teacher, Mr. Dorwin, sighed visibly. "Let's move on," he said quickly, embarrassed for him. During math, Josiah answered a problem wrong, 6 instead of 9, and a tall boy called Ridge leaned over and whispered, "Are you dumb or just slow?" By lunch, Josiah had wet his pants and tried to hide it by tying his sweater around his waist. He ate alone in a corner, chewing slowly, watching the clock. That afternoon, when the school bus returned them to the gravel road, they didn't speak. Elora had red scratch marks on her notebook from someone scribbling over her notes. Josiah's sock puppet, Franklin, was missing. Talmadge didn't ask what happened. He opened the door and handed them hot mugs of cocoa. He waited until they drank in silence, then gently placed a worn paperback between them on the table. The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. "I want you to read 1 page a night," he said. That boy didn't speak English, didn't have electricity, and still, he changed everything. Elora flipped the book open. Josiah leaned closer. That night, they lay awake long after Talmadge had gone to bed. Elora whispered into the dark. "Do you think he believes in us?" Josiah answered softly. "And he fixed that broken porch step with 1 nail." Elora smiled faintly in the dark. "He probably thinks 2 broken kids won't be much harder." It had been 2 months since Elora and Josiah first stepped into Winter Lake Elementary, And though the initial sting of isolation had dulled, they still remained outsiders. The whispers hadn't stopped entirely. Some kids had simply grown bored of mocking them, while others found new ways to exclude without speaking, moving their chairs away when the twins passed, turning their heads deliberately in group assignments, laughing under their breath when they answered questions too quietly or too strangely. But in those 2 months, something had also started to change. Every evening after school, Talmadge waited for them on the porch, often with a small folded note in his palm. The notes contained riddles, brain teasers, or strange facts like, there are more atoms in a glass of water than glasses of water in all the oceans. At first, the twins didn't understand them. Then, slowly, they started looking forward to them, discussing them, debating them, challenging each other. On weekends, Talmadge transformed their garage into a makeshift lab. He taught them how to use a soldering iron, how to read circuit diagrams, and how to mix vinegar and baking soda to inflate a balloon. Josiah took to mechanical things. He liked patterns, gears, and cause and effect. Laura became obsessed with questions, big ones about space, biology, consciousness. At night, while the wind howled outside, she often lay awake whispering her theories into the dark, while Josiah scribbled diagrams by flashlight. And then something happened on a rainy Wednesday morning in March. Their math teacher, Mr. Thane, introduced the concept of the Fibonacci sequence. He wrote the numbers on the whiteboard. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. Anyone know what comes next? He asked the class. No one answered. A few heads drooped. Someone whispered, "This is boring." Elora, who usually never raised her hand, slowly lifted her arm. Mr. Thane blinked, clearly surprised. "Yes, Elora?" She stood, gently tapping her pencil against her palm to steady her voice. "The next number is 34, then 55. It's a recursive sequence. Each number is the sum of the two before it." Some kids blinked. Ridge snorted from the back row. "Big deal. You can count." But Elora kept going. "It's more than just counting. The sequence is everywhere. It shows up in sunflower seeds, pine cones, the spiral of galaxies, even in your DNA." The room went still. She looked at Mr. Thane and asked, "If everything in nature follows this pattern, doesn't it mean pain can too? That it builds, but then leads to growth?" For a full 3 seconds, nobody said a word. Then someone behind her whispered, "How do you know that?" Elora shrugged. "I just read a lot, and I think about things." From that day on, things were different. Some students began asking her for help with homework. A boy named Milo, who usually never talked to anyone, asked if she could explain fractals to him. During recess, a small group of kids invited her to play cards. Even Ridge, reluctantly, stopped calling her names. Josiah, though quieter, found his moment the following week. In science class, the teacher's old projector jammed during a lesson on the water cycle. She sighed, slapped the machine, and groaned, "It's useless." Josiah raised his hand. "I could fix it." She blinked. "You can?" He nodded. With quiet confidence, he walked to the front, pulled a paperclip from his pocket, and gently worked it into the side of the projector. Within 30 seconds, the light flickered back on. The room erupted into soft applause. After class, the teacher handed him a book called The Way Things Work and told him to keep it. That night at home, the twins couldn't stop talking over each other, both excitedly sharing their days with Talmadge. For the first time, their words poured out unguarded, fast, and raw. He listened, smiling with a quiet pride in his eyes, nodding with each story, but not saying much. When they had finally gone to bed, Elora left her door slightly open and whispered, "Dad?" Talmadge, halfway down the hall, stopped. She didn't repeat it. He didn't need her to. He just stood there, frozen in the moment, holding his breath, like someone afraid that if they moved too quickly, they might scare away a miracle. Spring arrived late in North Grimley that year. The trees were still bare in April, but the cold had softened and the ground began to breathe again. Birds returned, grass pushed timidly through the soil, and the wind no longer bit, it brushed. For Elora and Josiah, it felt like the world itself was thawing alongside them. Talmadge had been preparing something quietly, something neither twin noticed at first. Every evening after they went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table under a dim lamp, studying flyers and brochures, comparing dates and cities. He made phone calls late into the night and marked things with red ink on the calendar. When the time was right, he gathered the twins at the breakfast table one Saturday morning. "There's something I want you to try," he said, sliding two folded papers across the table. Elora opened hers and read the title aloud. Midwest Regional Young Inventors Expo. Josiah squinted. "Is this a science fair?" "Not just a science fair," Talmadge said, sipping his coffee. "This one's different. No age limits, no fixed categories, just ideas. Original ones. You don't need to be rich or from a fancy school. You just need something worth showing." The twins looked at each other. "Why us?" Josiah asked. "Because you don't just answer questions anymore," Talmadge said. "You ask the ones no one else thinks to." They didn't agree right away. Elora was afraid of being laughed at. Josiah hated the thought of standing in front of strangers. But Talmadge didn't pressure them. He just left the flyers on their desks and waited. By Monday, Elora had a notebook filled with sketches. "I want to build a filter," she announced at dinner. "Something kids can use to clean puddle water. Not just to drink, but to understand what clean really means." Josiah, quiet at first, finally said, "I want to make a game. Not like a video game. A memory trainer. Like a puzzle that changes every time. For kids who can't sit still or get distracted, I think it could help them learn." Talmadge's eyes softened. He nodded once. They began working immediately. The garage became a laboratory. Old wires, soda bottles, toolboxes, batteries, and gears piled high on the workbench. Elora researched activated charcoal, designed mesh layers, and tested water from puddles outside. She recorded results in spreadsheets, adjusted dimensions, added a crank. Josiah spent hours sketching sequences of cards, using strings and magnets to build a mechanical memory board that lit up with correct answers. He tinkered endlessly, muttering, adjusting springs, failing, and trying again. Talmadge worked beside them, never taking over, just offering tools and asking questions. What if you tried a stronger magnet? Could you simplify the mechanism? Why does this version work better than that one? Evenings were filled with bursts of laughter and frustration. Sometimes something exploded. Once, a vinegar bottle blew open and covered Josiah in foam. He shrieked, Elora screamed, and Talmadge burst out laughing harder than he had in years. A week before the expo, Talmadge sold his vintage motorcycle, the same one he used to ride with his late wife. He hadn't touched it in 2 years, and the garage had needed the space. When the buyer drove away with it, Talmadge turned back to the house with a strange stillness in his chest. But he didn't regret it. He used the money to buy them real presentation boards, batteries, and even printed name tags with Elora Kane, Inventor, and Josiah Kane, Inventor. The day of the expo arrived cold and clear. The regional hall was massive, filled with brightly dressed students from charter academies and magnet schools. Some had team t-shirts, matching banners, polished prototypes with LED displays. Talmadge drove the twins in his truck, parked far off in the gravel lot, and helped them carry their homemade inventions inside. People stared. Some kids laughed at Josiah's cardboard memory box. One mother whispered behind her clipboard, "What's he even trying to show?" But once the judging began, something shifted. Elora stepped forward confidently and began explaining her filter to the panel, how it worked, how it could be used in low-income areas, how even school children could build one with under $3 of material. Her voice didn't tremble. Her eyes burned with clarity. Josiah took longer. His hands shook when he began. But when one of the judges asked a question about attention deficit learning, Josiah's eyes locked in, and he explained in intricate detail how the randomness of his device stimulated new neurological connections through trial, error, and pattern disruption. They didn't just answer questions. They taught. They inspired. They stunned the room. By the end of the day, a small crowd had gathered around their booth, not out of pity, not curiosity, but awe. Teachers took photos. Other students scribbled notes. One university representative quietly asked Talmadge where the twins went to school. "Winterlake," he said. The woman looked surprised. "And you're their teacher?" He smiled slightly. "I'm just their father." That night, as the truck bumped home through dark roads, both twins fell asleep in the back seat, still wearing their inventor tags. Talmadge glanced at them in the rearview mirror, his heart filled with something that had no name, too big for pride, too deep for joy. Maybe it was redemption. Maybe it was just love. It was 2 days after the regional expo when Talmadge received an unexpected phone call at work. He was hunched beneath the hood of a stalled pickup truck in the corner bay of Jenkins Auto. his hands black with grease and his back aching from hours of labor. The ringtone buzzed through the shop, low and insistent. He wiped his hands with a rag and answered, expecting it to be a client. Instead, it was the principal of Winterlake Elementary. Talmadge, came the clipped voice of Mrs. Cardle, the school principal. We need to schedule a meeting. It's regarding Elora and Josiah. His heart froze. His mind raced with every anxious possibility. Had someone hurt them? Had there been an incident? They're not in trouble, are they? He asked, his voice sharpening. No, she said, pausing. But there's been a development. Something we didn't expect. Later that afternoon, Talmadge sat in the principal's office. The walls were lined with plaques and framed mission statements, but none of it seemed to mean anything when you looked past the surface. The room felt cold, bureaucratic. Next to Mrs. Cardle sat another man in a tailored suit with silver hair and an expensive briefcase. He introduced himself as Lemuel Brock, superintendent of the district. We've reviewed the footage and reports from the regional expo, Mr. Brock began. Your children's performance has raised quite a bit of attention. Talmadge's brow furrowed. I'm listening. They exhibited knowledge and articulation far beyond their age group, Brock continued. Our academic board reviewed their science and problem-solving approaches and flagged them as exceptional cases. Possibly gifted. Mrs. Cardle cleared her throat awkwardly. We've also been contacted by 2 local newspapers and, rather surprisingly, a charter school for advanced learners in Grand Rapids. They're interested in evaluating both children for a potential accelerated program. Talmadge sat very still. He looked at their faces that had once barely looked up when the twins first arrived with their tattered bags and stitched-up clothes, faces that now leaned forward with polished curiosity, as if they had discovered rare coins under a layer of dust. And what exactly are you proposing? Talmadge asked. Mr. Brock folded his hands, choosing his words carefully. We'd like to begin individual assessments to see how far ahead the twins truly are. Depending on results, we could recommend a transfer to a higher-level institution, possibly even begin conversations about scholarships. Talmadge leaned back slightly. All this after they spent weeks being mocked in your classrooms? After teachers ignored them? Mrs. Cardle's smile faltered. We didn't realize what we had in front of us. No, he said, voice low. You didn't bother to look. There was a pause. Brock softened his tone. Mr. Kane, I understand your frustration, but this could be life-changing for them. With the right resources, Elora and Josiah could... Talmadge cut in. They already are life-changing. For me. Silence fell across the room. He stood slowly, towering over the desk, but never raising his voice. I'll consider what's best for them, but you don't get to suddenly claim them now that they've proved their worth. He walked out, leaving 2 stunned administrators behind. Back home, Elora was curled on the porch swing reading a book on fractals. Josiah sat cross-legged nearby, dismantling an old radio with focused intensity. When Talmadge approached, they looked up expectantly. He sat on the edge of the porch and told them everything. They didn't speak right away. Elora looked away into the woods. Josiah traced the grooves on the circuit board in his hand. So, they want us now? Elora said quietly. Seems that way. Because we're useful? Talmadge shook his head. Because you're brilliant. But you always were. They just didn't know how to see it. Do we have to go? Josiah asked. No, Talmadge said. You don't have to do anything. But if we do this, it'll be on your terms. You'll walk in as who you are. Not as a project they rescued, but as the mind they almost missed. He let the silence settle around them. The sun had started to lower, painting the sky in strips of orange and violet. Then, Elora spoke. I want to go, not to prove anything to them, but because I think there are more questions out there. Bigger ones. Josiah nodded. And I want more tools, more parts. I want to build things no one else has seen. Talmadge smiled, wide and full, not the reserved grin he usually wore. And then we'll start the next chapter. That night, he watched them from the doorway as they worked side by side under a single lamp, Elora scribbling calculations and Josiah wiring a prototype. They didn't know the world was starting to notice. They didn't care about headlines or scholarships. They only cared about discovering more, building more, becoming more. And Talmadge, for the first time in his life, realized something. He hadn't just adopted children. He'd become part of a rising storm of brilliance and love. The auditorium at Cranfield Hall was unlike anything Alora and Josiah had ever seen. High vaulted ceilings soared above rows of velvet lined chairs, and soft golden light fell from elegant chandeliers. The National Young Inventors Showcase was being held here this year, a historic venue in the heart of Chicago. It felt like something out of a dream or a storybook. Students from all over the country had arrived, many in school uniforms or custom polo shirts with embroidered logos. The twins, in their simple navy sweaters and jeans, stood quietly beside Talmadge in the entrance hall, taking it all in. Their display booth was near the back of the exhibit floor, next to a team of students from a prestigious prep school in Massachusetts. That group had an enormous, sleek 3D printed drone suspended on carbon fiber rods. Across the aisle, a girl from San Francisco showcased a miniature solar desalination device. Elora's and Josiah's inventions were simple by comparison. One table held Elora's hand-built water purifier, constructed from transparent tubing, mesh filters, and reclaimed plastics. Beside it sat Josiah's mechanical memory trainer, a wooden puzzle box with hand-cut compartments, wires, and a logic system powered by magnets and sensors. It looked like something out of a forgotten toy shop. People walked by without stopping at first. Some glanced and moved on. Others murmured, clearly doubting. A judge passed once without saying a word. Elora's posture tightened. Josiah shrank into himself, but Talmadge didn't flinch. He placed a hand on Elora's shoulder and leaned close. "When the moment comes," he said, "don't try to impress them. Just show them what's already inside you." And then, slowly, the tide began to turn. An older woman, a retired NASA engineer, and one of the lead judges stopped at their table. She watched silently as Elora poured dirty puddle water through her device and collected it in a beaker at the bottom. It came out visibly cleaner. Elora explained each step: activated carbon, mesh filtration, pressure layers, then calmly shared how it could be replicated for less than $4. The woman raised an eyebrow. "What inspired you to build this?" Elora hesitated. Then, with clear eyes, she said, "I know what it's like to not trust your own drinking water. I think kids should understand what clean means. Not just hope, it's clean." A small crowd gathered. Then came Josiah's turn. A young boy from another booth noticed his memory device and asked, "Is that a game?" Josiah nodded and activated the board. The tiles lit up in a pattern, then reset. The object was to remember and reproduce the sequence. The child tried and failed, then tried again. Josiah smiled and knelt beside him. "Your brain gets faster each time. It's not about being right. It's about trying again. That's how you train it." By the time the judges returned, the crowd around their booth had doubled. Students who had laughed earlier were now asking questions. Teachers from other schools took notes. The drone booth next door looked suddenly less impressive. When it was time for formal presentations, Josiah volunteered to go first. He stood behind the podium on the stage, eyes scanning the large, expectant audience. For a moment, his mouth opened, and nothing came out. His breath caught. Talmadge stood silently at the back of the auditorium, holding his breath too. Then Josiah looked down at his hands, clutched the corners of the podium, and spoke. "My name is Josiah Kane. I used to think I was broken. I couldn't speak right. I couldn't think fast. But my dad gave me tools, not labels. And I learned my brain is just a different kind of engine." Gasps followed as he walked through the mechanics of his invention. He even took questions from the audience, something he never would have dared weeks earlier. Then Elora took the stage. She spoke with the poise of someone far beyond her years. "I was told I was quiet, that I didn't participate. But no one ever asked what I was thinking. I've been thinking about water, about life, about why so many of us grow up not understanding the world around us. I want to change that, one invention at a time." When she finished, the applause wasn't polite. It was thunderous. By the end of the event, the twins had been interviewed twice by local media. One judge invited them to attend a summer innovation camp with a full scholarship. Two university professors offered to send additional materials to nurture their growing potential. But none of that mattered as much as what happened after the stage lights went out. Backstage, in the quiet hallway lined with crates and boxes, Elora turned to Josiah and whispered, "You didn't stutter. Not once. Josiah stared at her. You didn't pause. Not once. They both looked up as Talmadge approached, slow and steady. His eyes were shining. He knelt and pulled them into a rough, quiet hug. You didn't just show them your minds, he murmured. You showed them your fire. And for the first time, the twins didn't feel like orphans or outsiders or exceptions. They felt seen, chosen, and unstoppable. The return to North Grimley was quiet and slow, as if the world was trying to process what had just happened. The long drive from Chicago wound through endless stretches of farmland and forest, the truck humming gently beneath the silence. Elora and Josiah sat in the back seat, not asleep this time, but staring out their windows, each lost in their own thoughts. Neither of them had taken off their inventor name tags. Talmadge kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on a stack of envelopes they'd received after the showcase. Some were invitations, others scholarship offers. One was a letter from a national STEM foundation, expressing interest in mentoring both children for advanced academic placement. He hadn't told them yet. He wanted the moment to belong to something simpler. When they finally pulled into the gravel driveway, the house looked smaller than they remembered. Weathered, crooked, familiar. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the chickens clucked lazily in the yard. Nothing had changed, but they had. That night, after unloading their things, they had dinner at the worn kitchen table just like always. Chicken stew, cornbread, and sliced apples. No big speeches, no ceremony, just warmth. Just home. Afterward, the twins asked if they could stay up a little later to work. Talmadge agreed, though he knew they were exhausted. He watched from the doorway as Josiah began sketching improvements to his game. New tiles, an added color sequence, a different circuit layout. Elora was flipping through a book on global water access statistics, murmuring numbers under her breath. Talmadge said softly, you don't have to keep proving yourselves. You already did more than enough. Elora looked up at him. We're not proving anything, Dad. Josiah nodded. We're just not done learning yet. Talmadge chuckled, rubbed the back of his neck, and walked into the room. He pulled up a chair and sat with them, taking Josiah's schematic and quietly pointing out where the voltage might short. They stayed like that for another hour, collaborating, laughing, questioning, adjusting. The house hummed with energy. In the following days, the town began to change. The local paper published an article on the twins with a full-page photo of them holding their awards. Teachers from Winter Lake Elementary began to ask questions they had never asked before. Not just to Elora and Josiah, but to every student. One of the boys who used to mock Josiah in class walked up to him during recess and said awkwardly, "That memory game thing? It was cool. Sorry for being a jerk." Other students began showing up to school with their own little inventions. Some made paper bridges, others built mini solar cars from kits. A quiet revolution had begun, one sparked not by adults, but by two children who had once been invisible. Then came the letter from the district. It was an official request. Elora and Josiah were being offered a place at a specialized academy for gifted youth, with full tuition and housing covered. It was a huge opportunity. Elite curriculum, top-tier mentorship, the kind of chance most kids never got. Talmadge sat with them on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. "They want you to go," he said, "and I want you to know. I'm proud of you whether you say yes or no." Elora held the letter in her lap. Josiah sat beside her, holding Franklin, the old sock puppet they thought they'd outgrown. But tonight it had returned. Soft, faded, still there. Elora spoke first. "It's far. We'd have to live on campus." "We'd see you only on weekends," Josiah added, his voice barely above a whisper. Talmadge nodded. "I know." There was a long silence. And then Elora said, "We'll go." Josiah looked at her, then slowly nodded. "We'll go, together. But only," Elora added, "if we can come home every Sunday and keep working in the garage. And if you keep sending us riddles." Talmadge smiled, his throat tightening. "Deal." The summer passed quickly. There were suitcases packed, school forms signed, and long lists of supplies. When the time came to say goodbye, it was harder than any of them had expected. But it wasn't a parting, it was a branching path. The academy welcomed them with open arms. And within weeks, Elora was leading her first science project team while Josiah designed a device the school wanted to patent. They missed home, but they carried it with them in the way they worked, the way they lifted others, the way they listened. And every Sunday, the old Ford truck waited by the academy gates. Inside was a man in a worn army green coat, and in his hand, always, was a new folded note. Sometimes a riddle, sometimes a quote, but always ending the same way. Keep building. I see you. I love you. Dad! And as they grew into young scientists, into leaders, into themselves, one truth remained. They were never rescued. They were simply seen. And that made all the difference. From an author's perspective, the ending of this story holds a quiet, grounded triumph. It doesn't rely on fireworks or sudden riches. It blossoms through something more lasting: recognition, connection, and transformation. Laura and Josiah didn't need to be saved. What they needed was space, trust, and someone to believe in the potential that had always lived within them. That's what Talmage gave them. Not charity, not correction, but unconditional presence. The beauty of the ending lies in its emotional maturity. The children choose growth not to escape their past, but to honor it. Not to impress the world, but to understand it better. What moves me most is that the story doesn't close with applause or medals, but with a truck waiting every Sunday and a father who never stops writing riddles. Because in the end, brilliance means little without love. And when love and knowledge walk hand in hand, especially in the lives of children who were once unseen, that is the real miracle. It's not a fairy tale. It's a blueprint for what hope can look like when someone chooses to stay,